A billionaire was seconds away from signing over his empire when a hotel housekeeper pressed a folded note into his hand. What he did next changed both their lives forever. Liam Hargrove had built Hargrove Capital from nothing. 38 years old, worth just over $2 billion, and currently sitting in a private meeting room on the 42nd floor of the Fairmont Royal York in Toronto, he was the kind of man who made decisions that moved markets. He had the jaw of someone who never second-guessed himself, and the eyes of someone who had learned, early, that softness cost you things. The acquisition agreement sat open in front of him. Across the table, his business partner of 12 years, Neil Ashford, was already uncapping his pen with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed the hard part was over. "We're making history today," Neil said, smiling. Liam looked at the document. $400 million. Nexigen Pharmaceuticals would fold into Hargrove Capital, and overnight, Liam would control the largest private pharmaceutical distribution network in Canada. It was the deal of his career. He reached for his pen. The room service door opened quietly. A young woman in a gray housekeeping uniform came in, pushing a small cart. She moved the way people in service roles learn to move in rooms like this, efficiently, invisibly, as if she understood that her job required her to not quite exist. She kept her eyes down, collected the used coffee cups near the window, and began replacing them. No one at the table looked at her. But as she passed behind Liam's chair, she slowed. She set a folded piece of paper on the edge of the table beside his elbow, so small and quiet that no one else noticed. Then she walked to the door and left without a word. Liam glanced down. The note was a quarter-folded piece of hotel stationery. 2 lines, written in small, urgent handwriting. "Don't sign. The patent clause in Schedule D is fraudulent. They're going to take everything." He looked up. Neil was watching him with an easy smile. "Ready?" Liam set his pen down. "Give me 10 minutes. Neil's smile didn't change, but something behind it did. "Liam, the Nexigen team flew in from Vancouver. We've been over every page of this 3 times. 10 minutes, Neil." He folded the note into his jacket pocket, stood up, and walked out into the hallway. She was at the far end of the corridor near the service elevator, loading linens onto her cart. When she heard his footsteps, she stopped but didn't turn around. "You," Liam said. "Now, talk." She turned. She was younger than he'd expected, late 20s, maybe 30, with dark circles under steady brown eyes and the look of someone who had rehearsed this moment and wasn't sure she was ready for it. "I know how this looks," she said. "I'm asking you to hear me out anyway. You have until that elevator arrives. Schedule D, subsection 12. It grants Nexigen retroactive licensing rights over 3 compounds your R&D team developed independently. After you sign, they'll claim those patents belong to them. They've already filed the paperwork in Quebec." She paused. "You'll spend years in litigation. And you won't win because Neil Ashford co-signed the Quebec filing 6 weeks ago." The elevator dinged. Neither of them moved. "How do you know any of this?" Liam asked. "Because I used to work for the law firm that drafted the Quebec filing." She picked up her cart and pushed it past him. "If I were you, I'd pull Schedule D before I signed anything." "Wait." He stepped forward. "Your name?" She hesitated. "Isabelle. Isabelle Morin. If this is wrong, you understand what happens to you." She looked at him evenly. "If it's wrong, you can fire me. I need this job." She pushed the cart around the corner and disappeared. Liam stood in the corridor for a long moment, the hum of the hotel around him. He went back into the meeting room, picked up the acquisition agreement, and turned to Schedule D. Subsection 12 was 3 paragraphs of dense legal language that on first read looked like standard IP indemnification. On second read, it was something else entirely. "Something wrong?" Neil asked. "I'd like to have my legal team review subsection 12 before we proceed." The room went quiet. The 2 Nexigen representatives exchanged a look that lasted a half-second too long. "Liam," Neil leaned forward. "We've already done 3 rounds of legal review. This is a formality, then another 24 hours won't hurt anyone." Liam closed the folder. "We'll reconvene tomorrow." On the drive back to his office, Liam called his head of legal, a methodical woman named Sandra Park, and told her exactly what to look for. She called back in 2 hours. "She's right," Sandra said. "I don't know where your source got this, but the Quebec filing is real. If you'd signed today, Nexigen would have owned the Hargrove R&D catalog within 18 months. Neil's name is on the co-filing. He's been in contact with Nexigen's legal team since February. February was 4 months ago. In February, Liam and Neil had been celebrating 12 years of partnership over dinner at Canoe. Liam sat alone in his office overlooking the financial district, watching the lights of downtown Toronto flicker on in the early evening. 12 years. Neil had stood as his best man at his wedding. Neil had flown to Calgary when Liam's father died. Neil had sat beside him in this same building on the worst nights of the 2008 crash and said, "We'll get through it," and they had. And for the last 4 months, Neil had been quietly working to gut him. Liam picked up the phone and called HR. He asked for the file of a housekeeper named Isabel Morin. The file arrived in his email 20 minutes later. He opened it, and for the second time that day, the ground shifted under him. Isabel Morin, 31, Bachelor of Laws, University of Ottawa, former associate attorney at Brennan & Cross LLP, one of the most respected corporate law firms in the country. Specialization: mergers and acquisitions. She had been at Brennan & Cross for 3 years before her employment ended 14 months ago. She was currently working as a housekeeper at the Fairmont Royal York, earning $22 an hour. Liam stared at the screen, a corporate lawyer from Brennan & Cross, cleaning hotel rooms. The next morning, Liam found her on the 14th floor, restocking a supply cart near the linen room. She looked up when she heard him, and her expression told him she'd half expected never to see him again. "You went to U of O," he said. "You practiced M&A at Brennan & Cross for 3 years. She set down the stack of towels in her hands. "You pulled my file. How does someone end up here from there? That's not relevant." "I think it is." He crossed his arms. "You spotted a fraudulent patent clause in a Schedule D that 3 rounds of legal review missed. That's not luck. That's someone who spent years in rooms exactly like the one yesterday." He paused. "My lawyers confirmed everything. You were right about all of it." Something crossed her face. Not surprise, but something more complicated. Relief, maybe. Or exhaustion. "I'm glad," she said, and turned back to the cart. "Isabel." He took a step forward. "Why did you leave Brennan & Cross?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't leave. I was pushed out." "For what?" "For flagging a billing fraud that a senior partner was running on 3 major clients." She straightened a row of folded sheets without looking at him. "I brought it to the managing partners. They thanked me for my diligence and asked me to resign quietly, because the senior partner in question billed 40% of the firm's revenue, and I billed 4%. She said it the way people say things they've had to stop being angry about just to survive. They gave me a non-disclosure agreement and a reference letter that described me as a solid but not exceptional associate. After that, no firm in Toronto would bring me on. Bay Street is a small street. You could have gone to the Law Society. I did. The complaint is still under review, 14 months later." She finally looked at him. "In the meantime, my brother Felix has lupus. He's 24. He needs medication that costs $3,000 a month, and the provincial plan covers about half of it. This job has benefits. The job I had didn't come with a version of me who was still employed, so." She shrugged, once, like she'd rehearsed not caring. "Here I am." Liam looked at her for a long moment. He thought about what it took to walk into a room like yesterday's, in a uniform like hers, and slide a note to a man like him. She hadn't just risked her job. She had risked the only thing standing between her brother and a medical bill she couldn't pay. "Why did you warn me?" he asked. "You don't know me." She met his eyes. "Because I watched a fraud happen once and I said nothing until it was too late to matter. And I decided I wouldn't do that again." A pause. "And because the paralegals at Brennan & Cross used to talk about you. They said you were one of the few people in this industry who actually paid his staff fairly and on time. I don't know if that's true, but it seemed worth betting on." Liam said nothing. After a moment, he nodded and walked back toward the elevator. That evening, he called Neil. "I know about the Quebec filing," Liam said. There was a long silence. Then Neil said, "How?" "It wasn't a question. Does it matter?" Another silence. When Neil spoke again, his voice had changed. The warmth gone. Something flat and tired underneath. "Liam, the deal was going to make both of us rich beyond what we built together. You always had moral reservations that cost us opportunities. I got tired of waiting. You co-signed a fraudulent patent filing to steal my company, Neil. I co-signed a legal document in Quebec. Let your lawyers argue about the rest." "They will," Liam said. "Tomorrow morning." He hung up and stood at the window, watching the lake in the darkness. He had spent 12 years trusting someone he apparently hadn't known at all. That thought didn't produce rage, not yet. It produced something quieter and more disorienting. The specific vertigo of realizing that a story you thought you knew had a different ending than the one you were told. The next morning, Liam's legal team filed an emergency injunction. By noon, the Quebec patent filing had been flagged by the Law Society of Ontario. By 3, 2 of the Nexigen board members had issued a statement distancing the company from Neil Ashford's individual conduct. Neil tried to reach Liam 4 times. Liam didn't answer. At 4 o'clock, Liam went back to the Fairmont Royal York. Isabel was in the staff locker room, finishing her shift. One of the other housekeepers came to find her and said there was a guest asking for her in the lobby, which had never happened in 14 months and which meant, she assumed, something had gone wrong. She came down in her uniform, still holding her coat, and found Liam Hargrove sitting in one of the lobby chairs with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, looking less like a billionaire than she'd expected, and more like someone who hadn't slept. "What happened?" she asked. "We filed this morning." The injunction went through. Nexigen's board is throwing Neil under the bus as we speak. He looked up at her. He's going to face fraud charges, probably disbarment proceedings as well. She sat down across from him. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it in the specific way you mean it when someone has lost something that can't quite be named. Not the money, not the deal, but the version of events they'd trusted. "You don't have to apologize for any of this," he said. "I know. But 12 years is a long time." He looked at her. "How did you know where to be yesterday? You couldn't have known we'd be in that room." "I didn't. I was assigned that floor. When I went in to clear the room and I recognized the Nexigen letterhead on the documents on the table, I had about 30 seconds to decide what to do." She paused. "I almost didn't. I told myself it wasn't my business. But you did. I did." He was quiet for a moment. "Isabel, I'd like to offer you a position." She went very still. "Head of Compliance and Legal Review. Full salary, benefits, office on the 38th floor. You'd report directly to me." He said it plainly, without the practiced warmth of a sales pitch. "I need someone in that role who actually reads what they sign and isn't too afraid of losing a client relationship to say so. You've demonstrated, fairly dramatically, that you qualify." She looked at him for a long time. He noticed that she didn't immediately say yes and that he respected her for it. "Is this because you feel guilty?" she asked. "It's because you caught what 3 full legal reviews missed, and you did it in 30 seconds while carrying towels." He met her gaze. "But yes, also some guilt." She almost smiled. "I'd need the Law Society complaint on record as part of my file." "Not buried," agreed. "And Felix's medication needs to be fully covered under whatever benefits plan your company runs. I'll have HR draw up the specifics today." She looked down at her coat, still folded over her arm, and then back up at him. "All right," she said. "Yes." He exhaled. "Good. Can you start Monday?" "I'm giving the hotel 2 weeks' notice." "Of course you are," he said, and something in the way he said it was almost warm. She stood up and he stood with her, and for a moment they were just 2 people in a hotel lobby in Toronto who had, against all reasonable probability, found themselves here. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. Liam. She held out her hand. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right call in the meeting room yesterday. A lot of men in your position wouldn't have stopped." He shook her hand. "A lot of women in your position wouldn't have left that note." She nodded once, professional and clean, and walked back toward the staff exit. He watched her go and thought that he'd been in this industry long enough to recognize competence when he saw it, and what he'd seen yesterday and today was something rarer than that. It was integrity operating under pressure, which was the only kind that actually counted. Over the next 3 weeks, the story of the Nexigen deal collapsed in the financial press. Neil Ashford resigned from Hargrove Capital and retained a criminal defense attorney. The Law Society of Ontario reopened its investigation into Brennan and Cross, and, within a month, the senior partner at the center of the original billing fraud that Isabel had reported was suspended pending a full hearing. Isabel read about it on her phone during her first week in her new office, a corner room on the 38th floor with a view of the lake that, on clear days, looked like it went on forever. She closed the article and went back to the compliance review she was running on Hargrove Capital's existing acquisition agreements. There were 3 clauses in 2 different contracts that needed to be renegotiated, and she had a meeting with Liam at 2 o'clock to go over them. She was 3 paragraphs into the first flagged clause when someone knocked. Liam came in without waiting for an answer, which she was already learning was the thing he did. He sat down across from her, glanced at the documents spread across her desk, and said, "How bad? 2 of them are fixable. 1 of them you're going to hate. Tell me about the one I'm going to hate," she told him. He was quiet through the whole explanation, asking 2 precise questions and then sitting with the answer. He didn't get defensive. He didn't minimize. He said, "What do you recommend?" And then he listened. She was starting to understand that this was simply what he did, and that it was, in rooms like this, genuinely unusual. They worked through lunch. Someone brought sandwiches from a place on King Street and left them outside the door. Neither of them acknowledged the sandwiches for 40 minutes. And then Liam picked one up without breaking a sentence and slid the other across the desk toward her, which was such an unself-conscious thing to do that she found herself unexpectedly not annoyed by him at all. "Can I ask you something?" she said, around the time they'd finished the second contract. "Go ahead. The note I left. If I'd been wrong, if the clause had been fine and I'd interrupted a $400 million signing for nothing, what would you have done?" He considered this. "Honestly? I'd have fired you. I know. But I would have been thinking about it for weeks," he said, "because someone who sees something wrong and says nothing is a liability. Someone who sees something wrong and acts on it, even imperfectly, that's the person you want in a room." She looked at him. "That's a very convenient thing to believe now that I turned out to be correct. I believed it before too," he said. "I just didn't know I was about to find out whether it was true." The lawsuit against Neil Ashford went to a pre-trial hearing in late October. Liam sat in the gallery with his legal team, and Isabel sat beside him because she was the person who had first surfaced the evidence, and the plaintiff's counsel wanted her available. She spent most of the hearing looking at the back of Neil Ashford's head, a man she had never met, who had spent months constructing a fraud that she had unraveled in 30 seconds in a hotel service corridor and felt something settle in her that had been unsettled for a long time. After the hearing, they walked out onto University Avenue in the first cold of November, leaves down, the city going gray and gold the way it does just before winter locks it in. "Are you all right?" Liam asked. She thought about it honestly before answering. "Yes," she said. "I think I actually am." They walked half a block before he said quietly, "I'd like to know more about you. Not the file version, the actual version." She glanced sideways at him. "That's a vague request. I'm aware. We work together. We do. That complicates things." "It does," he agreed, and didn't push it, which was, she decided, exactly the right thing to do. But she thought about it on the subway home, and again over dinner with Felix, who was looking better than he had in months now that his medication was consistent, and who listened to her describe the day with the attentive expression of someone who knew his sister well enough to hear what she wasn't saying. "He sounds like a decent person," Felix said. "He's not uncomplicated. Neither are you." She threw a piece of bread at him. In December, a week before Christmas, Liam found her in the office at 7:30 in the morning, which was earlier than almost anyone else arrived. He had 2 coffees from the place on Front Street, and he set one on her desk without being asked. "How's Felix?" he said. She looked up. "His last labs were good, really good. The rheumatologist thinks the current protocol is working." Something in Liam's face shifted, not performed warmth, but the specific ease of someone's receiving genuinely good news. "I'm glad, thank you," she said, "for the benefits. For making it work, you earned them." He sat down in the chair across from her, the way he had the day they'd worked through lunch, easy and unhurried. "Isabel, I want to say something without it being strange. Try. I spend most of my days with people who are trying to help me or protect themselves from me. Since you came on, I've spent some of my days with someone who is just trying to get things right." He looked at his coffee cup. "I'd forgotten what that felt like." She was quiet for a moment. "That's either a very genuine thing to say or an excellent opener." "Both," he said, and looked at her, and didn't look away. She picked up her coffee. Outside, snow was starting to come down over the financial district, the first real snow of the season, settling on the glass towers the way snow does, making everything briefly, improbably quiet. "Ask me properly," she said. "Dinner. Somewhere that's not this building." "Friday?" "Friday works." He stood up to go and then paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth," he said, "whoever told you that you were solid but not exceptional was wrong." She looked up. "You're exceptional," he said simply, and left before she could answer. She sat with that for a moment, And then she smiled. Not the careful, controlled expression she'd learned to wear in rooms where she needed to prove herself, but something quieter and more honest. The kind of smile that happens when you stop expecting to be seen and then, unexpectedly, you are. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in February, Felix was well enough to go skating on the Rideau Canal for the first time in 2 years. He called her from Ottawa the night before, barely containing himself, and she listened to him talk for 20 minutes about whether his ankles were still strong enough, and whether he remembered how, and whether she thought Liam would maybe want to come up for the weekend. Because Felix had decided he liked him, which was Felix's way of saying he trusted him, which was the only endorsement she had ever needed. She called Liam. "Ottawa," she said. "My brother wants you to go skating with us." There was a brief pause, and then he said, "I haven't skated since I was 12. Felix will teach you. He's very patient. Will he judge me if I fall?" "Absolutely," she said. "But he'll be kind about it." Another pause. Then simply, "I'll drive." They went. Liam fell twice on the canal. The second time badly enough that a child of about 6 offered to help him up, which Felix documented photographically, and which Isabel knew would be referenced for the rest of their lives. They skated until their faces went numb, and then they found a spot near the Chateau Laurier that sold hot chocolate, and stood there, the 3 of them, watching the city's winter light go gold over the water. Felix said, to no one in particular, "This is a good day." Liam looked at Isabel over Felix's head. She looked back. It was.